All right, Chris Clark here from GC Live, GamecockCentral.com. I'm here with John Johnson from the Dothan Eagle. He is the sports editor there, longtime sports editor at the Dothan Eagle. John, I appreciate you taking time to join us today here on GC Live.
Absolutely, Chris. I appreciate you having me.
Yeah, sure thing. So, first of all, I was actually going through and reading some of your material, whether it was recent stuff or even some older stuff. Is the rumor true that you are a former pro wrestling fan or even a current pro wrestling fan?
Former is correct. I'm not into the new age professional wrestling, but go back, back to the 80s. I'm there. 70s, 60s, late 60s actually is when I got into it. So yeah, I'm a huge wrestling fan from way back, old school wrestling.
Yeah. So I'm not, as far back as then, but growing up, huge pro wrestling fan. Wes Mitchell, my colleague, who is not with us right now, obviously, but he also a pro wrestling fan. And I think Wes still catches a few of the newfangled matches. I'm with you. Not a big fan of the new stuff. Certainly some of the old ones. Who are some of your favorites, by the way, from back?
I don't know if you'll know these names, but Bob Armstrong, he was a big one back in the time. And, even, I watched when Hulk Hogan broke in back when he was known as Sterling Golden and I actually saw him. Now, this is kind of interesting. I'll do it real quick because I know we're not here to talk about wrestling, but we were at a match in Carrollton, Georgia, and he was Sterling Golden at the time, and me and my friend were talking to him, and he said, "Man, I'm about to go up north and wrestle, and they're going to change my name to Hulk Hogan," and really pushed me up there. So, I mean, like a week later, he was, headed to the big time.
That is awesome. Well, how about that? All right, so let's dive into Troy a little bit. I know that you've been covering their home games there, and as part of your role as the sports editor, the Dothan Eagle. I want to take a broad picture view first, with you being around that program. Obviously, Neil Brown departed the Troy program, went to West Virginia, did a fantastic job in Troy building that program up. But tell me if I'm wrong. The sense that I got kind of on a national level was that this was kind of an important year for Chip Lindsey, the head coach there. Is that kind of accurate in that people are kind of looking for this team to make a bigger step in year 3 for him? Is that right?
Yeah, this is year 3, and yeah, you're right. This is a huge year for him, I believe, because he's had really 2 just average years. Neil Brown had really built the program up back from where Larry Blakeney had it years ago. I mean, Troy's had a proud football history. And, when Neil Brown took over, it kind of got it back on track to where it was, quite a long time ago with Larry Blakeney. Had fallen off with him. And when Chip Lindsey came in, they were expecting just to keep the train rolling, and it hadn't happened. Now, Chris, the Sun Belt's a lot tougher conference than I think a lot of people give it credit for. And so it's not just really easy to win in this conference. But this is the year that I think even Chip Lindsey expected for better things. And it was kind of on track until last week at ULM where, they really played bad. And, now all of a sudden there's a lot of chatter about, we got to get rid of this guy, this, that, and the other. It's really early in the season. But I think when the season's done, Chip Lindsey has to have a strong finish to the year, really to keep any kind of momentum and to keep his job, quite frankly.
Yeah, and so what have you seen? I think, correct me if I'm wrong, losing campaigns, I think, his first 2 seasons there at Troy. What have been the major issues that have kind of had seen this program not take that step forward in the first couple years? And even, you look at that game you mentioned against ULM. I mean, has there been kind of a common theme of something or some things that have held them back from taking that next step?
A lot of it's been kind of puzzling. It's inconsistencies. And now last year, it's just with COVID, it's just a weird year. I mean, it just really was, because everyone felt like around here that they had the talent to play pretty well with everyone. And pretty much they were in the games. It was just they couldn't finish them off. And then with this year, everyone that was coming back, man, they didn't lose many people. The people who could come back really came back because they felt like, hey, this could really be our year. They've got a veteran offensive line. They've got pretty good receivers. They had good running backs coming back. And I think that's been the most puzzling part of they hadn't been able to run the football. And it was the same last year. They started off fine and looked like they had a tremendous rushing attack in the early season last year. And then towards the end of the year, that really tailed off. They had defensive problems last year, but that's changed this year. The defense is playing really well. So I think the question mark right now is, why is Troy not running the football well? They've got a center that's been there. Actually, I think he's been on campus 6 years. He's one of the super seniors, Dylan Bradshaw, who's really good. Everyone basically who was there last year starting on the line is back. They've got Kamani Vidal, who's a tremendous running back. He was a freshman last year. B.J. Smith, who 2 years ago was the preseason Sun Belt Player of the Year for offense before he got injured. Last year, he was battling back from the injury, wasn't very effective, but he's back full strength. First game of the year, both of them look really good, and since then, the running back room has really struggled.
Yeah, so that's something I noticed offensively. I was actually watching some of their game against Southern Miss, and that was one that really stood out. I think Southern Miss was up. I haven't finished that rewatch, to be honest with you, as I go through it on Thursday here today. But I did notice that the offense really struggled. I mean, no points in the first half. Couldn't run it that effectively, didn't pass it that effectively. Chip Lindsey, offensive background, right? So
right.
Some inconsistencies there. But here's something I wanted to hit on. Defensively, you mentioned that they made a big year-over-year improvement, from last season to this year. Shane Beamer, the Gamecocks head football coach, raved about this defense. He rattled off some statistics that they were top 5 in nationally. He said it was one of the hardest playing defenses he's ever seen as a coach in over 20 years. So high praise. What have you seen from this defense that's had them, kind of spurred that turnaround?
Yeah, and we've asked them that. I think it's more they're just playing with the edge. I think they were almost embarrassed last year because it's the same guys pretty much. I mean, they've plugged in some transfers, but those guys really haven't been the names you see on Saturday. It's really the guys who were there last year. There's a guy named Will Cholo, who's a defensive tackle who's really good. Javon Solomon has just been like a killer as far as on the rushing on the edge. He's been really good. And then their linebackers, probably the best linebacker in the Sun Belt is Carlton Marshall. And he's a guy he's a small guy, but he's just all over the field. I mean, and so it's almost like those guys took it personally last year and that, hey, we got to get better. And it's been that way since spring camp. They have really dominated the offense, in scrimmages and that kind of thing. So I don't know what the real, Chris, to give you a real answer, I don't know, except they've kind of grown up and just playing better.
Yeah. Yeah, I noticed really, an aggressive defense, a defense that definitely plays hard. And, as I was going through the game, I wrote down some of the names and some of the names I'd researched. And the 2 guys you mentioned were certainly on that list. And tell us a little bit more about Carlton Marshall, former walk-on, right? A kid who's 5'9", a former walk-on, and now he's one of the best linebackers really in the country, it looks like.
Yeah, and he's kind of been that way since he's been on campus and gotten a shot. He's just, his motor just runs. I mean, he's one of those guys, and if you want to compare him to a SEC guy, Jacoby McClain at Auburn, a guy that just gets all over the field and just finds a way to make tackles. He's one of those quiet leaders. He doesn't say a whole lot. But he's just everywhere, and he's just a natural athlete as far as getting to the ball, and not a big guy at all. But you're going to see him all over the field against South Carolina without a doubt, and that's one of the reasons Troy's defense is so good, because they are fast. They're not huge guys at all, but they can really attack and get to the ball.
Yeah, and that's something I think is really interesting about this coming matchup, because South Carolina's offense has struggled this year to run the football. Same thing with Troy, from what you're saying. And South Carolina's defense has sort of carried the day for them to be able to have them in position to be 2-2 and, had them in position to potentially win the Kentucky game. And same thing with Troy. Sounds like the defense there is carrying the day. So something's got to give on that side. So with that said, what do you see as the keys for a Troy victory if they're able to head to Columbia, upset the Gamecocks on Saturday? What would they have to accomplish, in order to do that?
I think they just have to mix things up a little bit more on offense. And Taylor Powell, their quarterback, he played at Missouri. He's a transfer from Missouri. He's one of the transfers who has made a difference, obviously. He's coming and taking the starting quarterback job from the guy who last year, Gunnar Watson, was really good. He's the backup now. But Taylor is a guy who really, he shows a lot of poise. He has so far. And, he's played in these kind of situations before. He started against Georgia a couple of years ago when they had an injury problem at Missouri. So being at South Carolina is not going to intimidate him, the big crowd and all that kind of thing. But he threw a ton of balls. If you do look at the second half of the Southern Miss game, is when they were having to come back. He was having to throw it all over the field basically because they were trying to come back. But they can't do that against South Carolina. I mean, they're going to have to mix. The run's going to have to be effective for the pass to be effective. One thing I think you may see is, and this is something Troy hadn't done much in the last couple of years, but they're trying to do this year, is pass to the tight ends. And I think you'll see that on Saturday because they've got to open up the outsides, and they got a couple of really good receivers. Tez Johnson's a guy to keep an eye on, at wide receiver. And there's a kid named Jabri Barber. This is his first year to getting playing time at wide receiver, but he was a running back in high school, and I'm real familiar with him because he's from Dothan. Last year he played on special teams, but they're really getting the ball to him now on the outside, not long passes, but short passes, because he used to be a running back, and he can make things happen as well. But to me, they just got to mix it up offensively, because defensively, I think they can hang in there with South Carolina.
Yeah, so with two teams where I don't know if anybody would project this to be a super high-scoring game, right? So I think the Vegas line right now is South Carolina by 9, something like that. Special teams has been an area that South Carolina in some of the early games has capitalized on. One thing that I noted, and this could have just been the first half of the Southern Miss game, not sure if it was indicative of a bigger problem, but Troy had some issues on special teams, in that game. They nearly got a punt blocked. I know it was a little wet, but they had a bad snap on a field goal, gave up a couple decent returns. Has that been an issue area for Troy, or is that more of just maybe a one-half aberration?
No, it has been an issue, and they've had 2 extra point kicks blocked over the course of the first couple of games. They've got a new kicker, Brooks Boosie, who is actually a Georgia transfer, and he attempted only his first field goal last Saturday. He connected. It was a 32-yarder, but there's a real question mark there because he really had, that was his first college field goal of his career, and he was at Georgia for a while. Basically, was their backup field goal kicker. Their punter's pretty good, actually. Luke Magliozzi, if I said it correct. He's a transfer from UConn, but they've had pretty good luck with him. But yeah, I think I don't know that much about South Carolina's special teams, but I think they would definitely have the edge there just because Bucci, for one, hadn't been challenged.
Good stuff. Well, hey, I really appreciate your time, John. We'll let you go and get back to your day. I know you're a busy man, so thank you so much for taking the opportunity to come on GC Live and kind of tell our audience a lot more about Troy, and also for your pro wrestling insights. Awesome Hulk Hogan story. I really appreciated that as a former fan of pro wrestling. So hope you have a great rest of the day, and thanks again for your time.
Chris, I sure appreciate it. Thank you for having me.